Today, we are talking about emotional regulation and mindfulness for kids with autism and toddlers showing signs. But really, we're talking about parents being emotionally regulated and all kinds of golden nuggets from our guest, Suzanne Tucker, who's a parent educator. She has been a physical therapist and an international speaker on mindfulness for over 30 years. She's been working with families. We talk about time ins versus time outs. We talk about how we, as the adults, as the parents, can get triggered, especially in times of stress and crisis. She has some really good tips throughout. So I hope you love this interview with Suzanne Tucker from Generation Mindfulness. Um, so let's get to it. It's a great one. Okay, it's so nice to have you here, Suzanne. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, we are going to jump into emotional regulation and time ins versus timeouts. Lots to cover here. But before we get to that, why don't you tell me and our listeners about your fall into the world of mindfulness and emotional regulation?
Well, thank you. First and foremost, I'm a mom. I'm a mom of four. My kids range from twin 15-year-olds to 25-year-olds. And I've been a physical therapist and a parent educator for 30 years. And my journey with mindfulness and emotional learning came when I knew a lot and I struggled a lot. So I had a lot of knowledge up here and I struggled down here. So my journey to teaching mindful, practical, playful ways of nurturing connection and emotional intelligence was furthered by my struggles to do it. And so what I hope we get to talk about today is the fact that knowing and doing are two different things. And we are here to be guides by the sides and advocates for our children. And that starts when we come to know and love ourselves and work on our knowledge of self, our skills, so we can depart that knowledge to our children.
Okay. So I know we're going to focus mostly about kids with autism, toddlers showing signs, and how we can teach them. But how can you tell if anyone, an adult, a child, a baby, is dysregulated? What does that look like?
Great question. So, what we're looking at is all brain based, it's all the nervous system. And we are looking for physical cues or signs that someone is struggling to integrate their current reality. It could be a physical reality, an emotional reality, a combination. And when the nervous system is struggling to integrate whatever it is, I feel hot, I feel hungry, I feel unsafe, we're going to show signs of dysregulation. And that is at every age, it's across the board. And why we struggle with this, I believe, is many of us were not receiving what we are now knowing is the brain based way to co regulate with another nervous system. We now have the science. Many of us did not receive co regulation as infants. And now we have an adult brain that maybe wasn't wired for sound in terms of being able to recognize, understand, label, express, and regulate. That's what I call the ruler method based out of Yale. Recognize, understand, label, express, regulate. That's really what we're doing for ourselves and for our children, whatever age they are. So for you out there listening, what you're going to look for, I think, first and foremost in yourself to know that you're starting to dysregulate is going to be qualitative, something that you feel in your body, and you'll be able to recognize the signs emotionally and mentally and physically. So, and then when you start getting a skill base with your own body, you can apply that to any child or any adult at any age. So you're going to look for basic signs, and we can go into a little more detail.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking about, emotional regulation and when I find that, and I'm sure the research does show this, when you're in the middle of a move, of a divorce, of a new diagnosis for a child, it is a stressful situation. Those are just three of the stressful situations that I can think of right off the top of my head. But um, even if you are normally pretty regulated, big events and life changes can really throw even the most regulated person into a tailspin, right? So if you are feeling, especially if you're a parent out there with a newly diagnosed child, or you're a professional and you just started a job and you're stressed, that can really look like you're dysregulated, right?
Correct. I love what you're bringing up because I think people think that we hover in this middle place and then maybe we go up or we go down. Actually, I would say for most of my life, I was in a defensive pattern. As a child, I was a highly sensitive child. So I was highly emotive. I was picking up a lot of emotional data, and I didn't have any emotional literacy and to be able to read this data or to integrate or do anything with it. So what I did was move into a hyper defensive mode where I was always scanning the environment for threats, and I was dysregulated largely most of the time. And I learned coping mechanisms as we do. As I've come to work with literally tens of thousands of families, I recognize that I am not alone. In fact, I think most of us are having heightened levels of stress and not understanding what that does to us as a human being with a nervous system. So, yes, stress is really the number one thing we want to look to for dysregulation or regulation. And also shame. Fear and shame are heavy triggers for dysregulation. So I felt shame, not even understanding why I was on hyper alert and dysregulated, because I was like, well, I had a normal childhood. I was loved. I was one of seven. I was cared for. All my physical needs were met. What is wrong with me? And I was only diagnosed with my ADHD in my 50s. And this is why I'm such a proponent for inclusive, meeting people where they are strategies that move beyond titles. I do believe diagnosis is liberation in many ways. It's been so helpful for me in my journey and my children. Three of my four children have ADHD. And being on their journey toward diagnosis helped me on mine. So wherever you are in terms of your neurology, for me, it's about know myself, love myself. And when I can do this, I can start to do this for and with my children. And I would say my number one thing is to be curious, because when triggers come up, we already know. We move into reactive state. If you challenge yourself to be self aware and look for the triggers, I get triggered daily, I would say. Okay. It's not about not being triggered, it's about noticing, and most of my work is in the repair. So as you practice noticing and labeling and identifying something, how I feel, what I did, what I thought, what I wish I would have done, what I wish I would have said, that's where our power lives. But we're raised in a world that wants us to think we need to be perfect. And that's a disempowering world. It doesn't matter how much information you know, as I pointed to earlier, it's taking the knowledge into the body where healing and learning and growth happen. And your work is largely based on repetition and information and empowerment. And I feel so strongly that families deserve knowledge and tools to help them practice playfully, practically these new skills so that they become habits inside the family life. Nobody's got extra time. Nobody needs a ton of to-dos. And that's why at Generation Mindful, we're really working on the power of micro moments, what's already happening and unfolding in your everyday life, the power of play, the power of relationships. And this is verbal and nonverbal. because a lot of our impact on children comes from just our very presence, our presence. And we can break that down a little bit more, but that's why it's so vital that we look to first our experience, our nervous system, and our capacity to notice and embrace when we're dysregulated, not judge. Don't you find, Mary, the first thing you do when you notice you're yelling or you notice you're dysregulated or your child is, it's a judgment. It's what our default is. It's to feel guilty or shameful.
If there's an adult listening out here, and obviously we don't, Suzanne and I both are anti spanking, anti timeout,
Correct.
but asking for help and saying, I want to change is totally, totally what the celebration was about.
Well,
But
I want to make the point is she had tried all the things, but they were all based on shame and guilt and not enoughness.
hmm,
After that call and this revelation with me, with love held instead of judgment, she never hit her child again. She's still in the community. And that's what it took, her being accepted instead of judged in that moment and learning a new skill. And that is my point. Of course, I do not promote violence, even punitive language, emotional
yep.
harm, right? These things. But what I want for every parent to know, it's about skill building. And it's
Hmm.
about starting right where you are. I just think we're in an information age where there's a lot of knowledge and a lot of lack of skills. And that leads to a lot of guilt and shame.
Yeah. Yeah, those are good points. And so if there is an adult out there, and I don't know of any adults that are completely emotionally regulated all the time, so how can we um, you know, how can we take steps before we talk about the steps to help our kids? What are the steps to help ourselves become better with mindfulness and emotional regulation? Like just real practical, what can we do?
So step number one is to remember you don't go climb a mountain and do no training and think you're going to be successful in climbing that tall tower, right? That big high mountain. You've got to build your muscles. So for me, the journey began with practice when I'm calm and connected, not thinking that somehow I'm going to somehow build this new muscle when I'm dysregulated. So don't wait till it's broken to fix it is my number one thing. Start working on mindfulness practice, which is as simple as, I know everyone hates to hear this, but the breath, breathing in and then breathing out longer than you're breathing in. That is my go-to. So it's a hack to the vagus nerve. So I want you to imagine this, back in the day when we were dysregulated and the brain was trying to scan for threats that we were going to die because someone was chasing us, it would link into the vagus nerve and say, how are we doing? And if we weren't breathing or our exhale wasn't longer than our inhale, the body knew we're under threat. So to retrain my brain, which baseline was always under threat, I had to learn to hack it. And what my favorite thing to do is to just breathe in for 4 and breathe out for 8. And
Okay.
I have some other strategies I use, but number one is to start sprinkling in practical things like just the breath into everyday life.
Okay.
The next one is to notice your trigger. So at the end of the day, just write down maybe the 3 times you felt the most triggered. Because if you can scan your life and notice it's food time, or it's leaving, or it's transitions, or it's in the car when it's so loud, you'll start to notice, oh, wow, my dysregulation is linked to my sensory world. I am getting overstimulated, right? And I'm having trouble integrating everything going on. Then you can solve that problem. So you want it, is it disrespect? I'll give you like the top 3. It's usually transitions. We're rushing and we don't feel set up to win. So we can solve that in some different ways, but we can't solve it in the moment, right? We've got to be intentional outside the moment. Transitions, disrespect, the feeling of, I just got hit, I just got spit at. You can't talk to me like that. I love you. All I do is work for you, and this is what I get. Those feelings inside are really real, and they are dysregulating. And they're not to not be thought or felt. The most dysregulating thing is that we think we're supposed to dismiss, deny, and not be human. So, what I would say to you in those moments, name it to tame it, feel it to heal it. And that might be saying, I feel so stressed. I feel so overwhelmed. I feel so sad, or whatever it is. And this might be to another adult or to a partner where you guys share regularly what's going on for you, and or at some point, depending on your child's developmental levels and their ages, inside your family life. And that's a shocker for people. They think that emotions are supposed to be happy and calm all the time. But what I want you to know is that you are teaching your child emotional regulation by them watching you dysregulate and then re-regulate. So some of my most powerful moments with my children are me noticing in the moment where I'm starting to go south, and notice, wow, you know what? I just noticed I'm starting to feel really anxious. You guys just said people are coming over, and I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off because I'm worried they're going to judge this craziness that's happening in our house right now. And the kids learn from that and they benefit. So don't overprotect your family from real, from authentic. Some of the best learning is going to happen really just right there in life. So there's the environment being disorganized or overstimulated, disrespect, and transitions are kind of the big three I see a lot of challenges with.
Okay. And then the one of the easy techniques is to breathe in for 4 seconds, breathe out for 8 seconds. Um,
And
to
actually,
me,
I don't want anyone out there to dismiss what happens when you do that. You literally will change your capacity to respond rather than react. Because what happens is you move from the emotive middle brain or the reactive brainstem. You literally, when you do this, you link up to the prefrontal cortex, where you literally have the brain cells to think, reason, modulate your response, impulse control, creative thinking, problem solving, conflict resolution. All of a sudden, your superpowers up here in the prefrontal cortex are online for you to have mastery and command and some control. Okay. So don't think when I say, oh, mindfulness, that I think this is happening. You're sitting on top of a mountain with crisscross applesauce. This is life is coming at you. And you really do have superpowers to be with what is. And for me, that's mindfulness. It's present to the moment with joy and ease, meaning it's coming at me and it's hard. How do I get present so that I can be with this? And that is a superpower. It's your capacity to respond instead of react. And that's largely what we do inside Generation Mindful. We say, how do we be with what is? And largely, it's just like you do with any skill. It's scaffolded, it's tangible, it's repeated, it's practical, and you do it again and again and again and again. And when you start to label your triggers, feel your feelings, give yourself permission to feel, and work backwards doing repair with you and or your child. They hit you on the head, you didn't like that, they spit, they threw. These aren't things we're going to tolerate or allow or promote. We want to learn adaptive, skills. So we are going to use them as learning and teaching moments. And we're going to go right into life to do that learning and that teaching. And that's why we could really benefit in preschools, daycares, kindergartens, and homes, actually prioritizing what I call emotional literacy.
yeah, so in the ABA world, and teaching kids with autism, you know, I think a lot of our brains might go to teaching emotions. And I have a high touch coaching program, for instance, and just a week or two ago, I looked at videos of a little boy and they were trying to teach him emotions with picture cards, and he was not at the point, in my opinion, based on his Becca assessment and where he was at language wise. He was not speaking at all, and A lot of the kids that I serve have the language ability of a one, not even a 2-year-old. 2 and 3-year-olds, especially by three, most kids that don't have any language delays are conversational, um, to a large extent, and pick up emotions, uh, can label emotions, can show you different emotions. Like they have a grasp of that, but for the children we serve, I think there is a lot of focus on, oh, well, we need to teach emotions for emotional regulation, and then doing, touch happy, touch sad. Like I was like, yeah, don't do that.
It's connected from reality, from relationship, from body, from experience. It's not the priority in that moment for that child. It disconnected in that way is not going to work for anyone, probably that child, especially in that moment. Now,
Yeah,
but if you look at how do infants learn,
yeah,
we're going to go to where our superpowers of eye contact or not eye contact. Sometimes eye contact would be the wrong thing to do. So we're really going to look for safety and belonging and regulation so that the body being present in the moment. You, the adult, are the prefrontal cortex that is online or not, but you are the one that has it. Okay. And your child doesn't. So they're largely, no matter where they are neurologically, every baby is born into the brain stem. If you look at a baby between like 0 and 6 weeks, you know how they talk about, oh, the baby's coming in and then one day a baby smiles, or people say, was that gas or were they smiling? So there's just development in the brain. We're living out of our brain stem, which is like eat, poop, thrive, very basic functions, breathe. And then we mature into the emotive brain, and we that might be where we go. That might be largely where it goes, where there isn't a lot of capacity for executive functioning skills. So the adult, I like to think of it as the outsourced prefrontal cortex. And it might be that way, where that's your superpower, is to start to learn, how can I harmonize with my dysregulated child who is largely living out of an emotive brain. And the emotive brain, we call the mammalian brain. I like to think of them as puppy dogs and kitty cats and animals that are very tapped into their sensory world, and their capacity to be in the world is linked to their capacity to be with their environment or their emotion or their hunger or their thirst or their temperature. So Mary's work, your work, that is why this is so vital. You've got a little person who's largely living out of that level of the brain where the environment matters. Safety is cued by ritual and repeat and same and predictable. Even for an infant who's living largely out of the brainstem, where we get into like sush and sway and, the things that we do with infants that are regulating, we do with toddlers, and we want to do on up as the child gets older. And honestly, in the work, I'm doing a lot of reparenting work in our community. And I'm doing those things for me, like for and with myself. So just to
yeah,
have a lot of compassion for whatever you're dealing with out there and looking at it from the brain, as you were
right.
talking about, Mary. That's
Yeah, and I think that's really an important part. I like the idea of like outsourcing, like the parent. That's why people are like, well, how do I teach my 5-year-old with autism who's not talking how to cross the street? You don't, because they're functioning at an 18-month-old level or a 9-month-old level for language. They don't understand rules, they don't understand concepts, they don't understand safety. So it's our job to keep locks on the doors and to prevent them from getting out. You're not going to have a child that can go into a pediatric ER, which I just did an episode last week about, and be able to do on a scale of 1 to 10, where's your pain, or describe pain. So we have to go way back to how we keep infants and toddlers safe And that gets harder as you have a 5-year-old, 8-year-old, 15-year-old who can open doors and get out. And that's why safety is so important. It's a whole chapter in my Turn Autism Around book. It's a whole focus. Um, and why the work that Suzanne is doing, and to um, help the parents get their own mindfulness and regulation together. And you're not going to be perfect.
You're not going to be perfect.
And even my son Lucas, who at the time of this recording is 29, he is still functioning at a toddler level. He's not for language, for communication, he's not fully conversational, but we have the system set up to keep him safe. And I think I may have told you this when we chatted, a week ago, Suzanne. But Lucas really can't tell you, he can tell you he's in pain, but he can't tell you on a scale of 1 to 10. He can't give you, well, it's stabbing pain, it comes down here. So we have to really keep data. He also can't really tell you if a task is too hard, or he's um, does wants to be done, or he'd rather do this job. So we developed a whole data sheet of, we watch his affect. We
Yes.
circle whether his affect was really high, being happy. We keep track of the prompt level. So a task that he needs no prompts, he's happy. We literally watch his face, the people that are with him, and keep data. Like, is that overkill? Well, it wasn't overkill when Lucas was struggling with severe problem behaviors. And for now, when we try new volunteer tasks and things like that, it's good data. Now we know instinctively, like, this is going to be good for him, this is not going to be good for him. But he could have an off day. So, in a way, like what you're describing, Suzanne, is really what we do with Lucas is, he can label whether something's, you know, happy or sad, but we literally watch his affect and count smiles and laughs, and do things that, and with my online courses and everything I do is like, we want the child to be happy, to be running to the environment, to be running to table time, to be running to get dressed, to be running to the bathtub, or if they're not running, at least walking, uh, you
I call
know,
it intrinsic motivation. And Mary, that's why what we're talking about here for everyone is the power to be with what is and to impact it with positivity. So if you can be with what is, you can impact it. So I think awareness is step number one, whatever it is. Where is my child? Where am I? Awareness, okay, first. And then research shows when we can start to celebrate awareness, we actually release dopamine, which is the number one thing we need to learn more, to do more. Same with our child, wherever they are. Once there's that intrinsic motivation to go to table time, to go to the bath, to engage in a self-care activity, whatever it is, we want to turn on the brain's natural chemical mechanisms toward motivation and learning, wherever it is, verbal, nonverbal. And what you're talking about is highly emotionally intelligent. What you're doing when you're interacting with your child and your caregivers are noting their response or their reaction, they're using emotional intelligence, empathy, compassion, awareness, social skills. So that is that. I mean, as you were speaking, Mary, this is why Generation Mindful. Each of us as human beings are called to apply the four components of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, self-care, awareness of others, care for others. That's, for me, that's emotion, that's EI or EQ. We're all doing it. And we teach all sorts of things. We need this in our homes, starting at in utero, as you are working toward, in utero, where the adult brain is active and bathing the baby who's being formed in neurochemicals, then birth. And I taught baby massage every week for 20 years. It's the beginnings of secure attachment are not our doing, it's our being, it's our presence. It's the safety and the acceptance we can bring to the chaos that is family life moment to moment. It is hard, it is chaotic, and we are wired for the negative. I mean, you've talked about negative bias, I'm sure, on this program. Literally, as human beings, we are biased toward the negative for safety and for self-preservation. So are our children, which means we need to be even more vigilant in surrounding them with the learning that comes through the positive. And it doesn't mean you're not setting limits or being firm. It just means that the language you're using and the behaviors you are using, the actions you are taking are structured and ordered and smart. I always say, like, work smarter, not harder. So I adore your work. I love parents knowing and having a path toward empowerment. And my work is similar. It's just that it's focused specifically on the emotions happening in the adult and in the child and in the relationship. And my whole thing has been tangible, make it tangible, because a stressed brain struggles to learn unless it can see or touch, or it's concrete, just like a child's brain. Make it playful, meaning don't wait till it's broken and you're in conflict to think you're going to grow that muscle. So I use play-based daily rituals, just like you do. You use a lot of fun and enrolling, engaging things that children look forward to. That's where our power lives. So tangible, playful, and inside relationship, which is where our brain learns. It's where we learn.
Mhm. Yeah. And I love the idea of like learning baby massage, and I'm sure you could use it for, older children and
Oh,
toddlers and
touch is the first sense to develop in utero. And did you know the same cellular layer that becomes your epidermis? We used to say your epidermis is showing as children. We thought it was so funny. Nobody knew what an epidermis was. It just means skin. And so when we learned that epidermis was skin, we'd say, oh, your epidermis is showing. But the epidermis layer is formed out of the layer that becomes our brain and our central nervous system. When
Mhm.
I learned that as a physical therapist early on, touch, the first sense to develop in utero, skin made out of the same cells as the brain and the central nervous system, the spinal cord. I started to go to touch as a tool. And I got trained and certified, and I taught families for 2 decades every Friday. It was literally my favorite hour of the week. I cried almost every week, Mary, because I didn't know what was happening, but the empowerment and the practice is what touched me so deeply. The empowerment, meaning it's simple, it's not hard. A lot of what we're sharing, it's intentional, but it's not hard. Except it is hard, right? To show up is ultimately like the hardest. But I just want to put a fine line under, like, simple is powerful. And I don't make everything hard. Like, we don't have to make everything hard. In fact, we want to get back to basics and simplicity and that joy and ease. And that to me was my training wheels for learning that as a parent, and then seeing the power of that empowerment into families, that just permission for to be with what is. I just
Mhm.
want to share one other thing. When you were sharing about your story about how you are with your son when he's learning new tasks and he's having big emotions, and you're really cued in and you're scaffolding your goals. It's so compassionate. Like, I got a little wet in my eyes because I felt a real high compassion happening there. And the biggest thing we can do as parents is to look at the goals we're setting for ourselves and for our children. In my work, when we do the trigger worksheet and work with triggers, what we look for is the goal driving the pain. And this is really revolutionary. No one is teaching us this, but I will teach you really quickly. If you can find the goal that's driving the pain, I don't want you to hit me and spit at me. You need to respect me. We will say, what's your goal? Well, for my kid to respect me, of course. And then I will help the parent actually cancel that goal and get under it and reset it. Because the thing that's happening is that pain is linked to something painful in the past. And you keep trying to create that goal and you keep feeling like you're hitting your head against the wall because you can't get it. So you just drive that trigger even more. And that's how it becomes a generational cycle where it has power over you. If you want to take your power back from those big, 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 big triggers, you've got to identify the goal, cancel the goal, get under it, and then reset it. So, what I mean by cancel the goal is if you're setting a goal where someone else's words, thoughts, and actions are the root of the goal, you might be struggling because you don't control other people, but you control you. So, in your situation, maybe you feel dysregulated when your kid's going to run out. You feel scared they're going to run out in the traffic, and you notice they don't have the capacity to learn this yet. Well, you've got to manage what are you going to do, your thought, your word, your action, and set goals for this challenge. You don't want to keep writing the goal, I want my kid not to run out in traffic. It's not going to happen right now. So, what are you going to do about your fear or your worry or your need to control this moment? And how can you make it work for you? Well, this is what I am going to do. I'm going to work on this lower tiered goal that I know relates to this. And I'm going to give my child a scaffold where they're going to succeed at whatever I'm giving them. I'm going to celebrate. And do you see the difference? But if we're writing goals that are too high for ourselves or our child, we'll constantly be caught in that loop of being not enough and failing.
And I like setting a goal of your own reaction, not,
Word action.
you
Me,
know,
me.
your
Yeah.
own regulation and not setting a goal for somebody else. I think
And
that's
you can
really
still have goals like, because we're the parent, like we're driving, like you say being the captain of the ship. You know, we want to go, let's say, sit at the dinner table because we value family time. But that's like 15 seconds, you know, here, how are we going to scaffold this goal? And then how am I going to be when this is happening? What are my words, my thoughts, my actions? Now I have some control and power over how I'm going to work toward this thing that I value here. Yeah.
right. And sitting at the dinner table, it might take a long time to have intrinsic motivation take precedent, and we might have to bring reinforcement to the table and serve easy foods, which is all in my feeding chapter of my book. Like
Yes. Yes.
I think, and Suzanne and I met a week or two ago, and we really do have a very similar path. We both, are very positive. We have both have community. So I do want to talk about you have a community, but you also sell tools, like the time in kit, and we don't have time to get into every tool. You sell bears and a lot of things that
Right. Oh,
can
yeah.
really help kids 2 to 8
Great.
that
And
are
it's not
functioning
just
at that
developmentally.
language ability that can begin to use those tools. So, how can people find all of your stuff, your community, your tools, your freebies to get
So
started?
simple. Just go to our website, genmindful.com. That's GEN, short for generation, genmindful.com. So
Yeah.
simple.
And we're going to put that in the show notes.
Right.
I would really encourage you. We're on very similar parallel mission. And I know I took some tips away just thinking about my own life. And I consider myself a pretty emotionally regulated person. But you did share some good tips today that is has got me thinking. So
Could I share one final
yes,
thing that I did not think,
absolutely.
because
Do
this
it.
is like my soapbox. I think this will change the world, though. You are not your feelings. You're not your feelings. You have feelings, but you are not your feelings. So I want everyone in the world to know that they can stop saying, I am mad, or I am sad, or I am proud of you. False. You feel mad, you feel sad, you feel pride. And why it's such a big deal is we are linking our feelings with our very identity. That's disruptive. That's confronting. That dysregulates me to think I'm an angry mom But to understand that I feel frustration when people don't listen to me, that's great. That makes sense. That's human. So one, no one taught you. You're not your feelings, you have them. Two, feelings aren't facts. They're not right or wrong, they're data. They're just data. So once we can mainstream, and that's really my mission, is mainstreaming the A, the B, and the C. The C is that it doesn't happen in the head, it happens in the body. The learning we want, the growth, it happens in the body. That's my ABC. And we can learn this and we can teach it. It can be simple, it can be playful. It doesn't matter neurologically where we are or where our child is. We can start where we are. That's where our power is.
Well, I think that's a great place to end it. Thank you so much for your time today, Suzanne. GenMindful.com. We will link everything in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.